All right, so now we're moving on to section 6.2. This will be created in 2 videos. And you'll see this chapter, besides that first section, we really focus on special quadrilaterals. All right, and a quadrilateral is a 4-sided figure. All right, so we're going to talk about a bunch of different 4-sided figures. In this video, we're going to get started with them. All right, So in our quadrilateral, if opposite, so here when we talk about opposite sides, it's the sides that don't share a vertex. So segment AB and segment CD, they're opposite sides because they do not share a vertex. And opposite angles do not share a side. So in this case, angle A and angle C are opposite angles. Now, I know they don't say angle B and angle D are, but angle B and angle D are also opposite angles, and segment BC and segment AD are also opposite sides. All right, so in a quadrilateral with 4 sides, we will have 2 pairs of opposite sides and opposite angles. All right, and it's important for you guys to be able to identify what is an opposite side and what is an opposite angle because of the traits that happen with some of these special quadrilaterals. First special quadrilateral we're going to talk about is a parallelogram, and the overall arching definition of a parallelogram is simply it's a quadrilateral where both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. So the main definition, if I say what is the definition of a parallelogram, it's simply just that both of the opposite sides are parallel. So that is its definition. Now, a parallelogram has other traits and characteristics to it. So you should pause this screen and write down all of this. It's important that you guys know this information. All right, so if it's a parallelogram, then that means opposite sides are not only parallel, but they are congruent. So the opposite sides are congruent to each other. So in this case, segment AB is congruent to segment CD. And segment BC is congruent to segment AD. And we know that this is a parallelogram, besides the fact that they tell us properties of parallelograms, but they tell us that both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. So I know it's a parallelogram. So if it's a parallelogram, opposite sides are congruent. If it's a parallelogram, then opposite angles are congruent. So angle A is congruent to angle C, and angle B is congruent to angle D. So not only are the opposite sides congruent, but both opposite angles are congruent as well. All right, consecutive angles, meaning it's the angles that's right next to it, so we don't skip any angles to get to it. So the consecutive angles for angle A would be angle B and angle D. So consecutive angles are supplementary. And this just makes sense. You don't even need this in order to solve here because let's draw out these 2 parallel lines BC. All right, and then we're going to draw this segment BA. All right, we're going to draw it so we can see it a little bit easier what we're used to seeing. All right, so here's BC and here's AD. Now, these 2 lines are parallel. This line here, that I'm just highlighting again in red, is called our transversal. And we know that these 2 angles are same side interior angles, and we know that they are supplementary from what we learned earlier in the year. So in this case, it just makes sense. We know that this is true. But consecutive angles are supplementary. So that means A and B add up to 180 because they're consecutive. That means A and D will also add up to 180 because they're consecutive. And then that means B and C will add up to 180 because they're consecutive. And C and D will add up to 180 because they're consecutive. All right, so all consecutive angles in a parallelogram will add up to 180 degrees. And then if it's a parallelogram, the diagonals will bisect each other. So that means these diagonals are guaranteed to bisect each other. So that means this segment, BZ, is going to be congruent to ZD. So we know our diagonals bisect each other, and that means this segment here, AZ, is going to be congruent to CZ. All right, so these are the traits and properties of a parallelogram that you have to know. So whatever you need to do to remember this, watch this video a bunch of times, write it out a few times, make up cue cards, whatever it is that you need to do, you have to remember and memorize these properties. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a problem using these properties. So here we have a parallelogram, even if it doesn't tell you. So first off, let me tell you guys again, let me just tell you guys this symbol here, that is a symbol for parallelogram. All right, so if you want to say parallelogram, you can use that symbol. If you want to say parallelograms, you can use apostrophe S. All right, it's kind of looks like a rectangle, but it's a little slanted. All right, but that's parallelogram. So not only do they tell us in the directions that ABCD is parallelogram, but they give us the arrows and letting us know that the opposite sides are parallel. So we know 100% that it's a parallelogram regardless of the directions or not. So if I want to solve for the measurement of angle A, well, the only angle they give me is B, and A and B are consecutive angles. So I know the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B has to be equal to 180 degrees. Consecutive angles in a parallelogram are supplementary. So the measure of angle A plus 120 is equal to 180 degrees. So we would subtract over 127. Oops. So the measure of angle A is equal to 53 degrees. So we know that this is 53 degrees. If I want to solve for the measure of angle D, well, B and D are opposite angles, so that means they are congruent. So if that's 127 degrees, I know D has to also be 127 degrees without doing any work. If I'm going to solve for X, in a parallelogram, I know opposite sides are congruent. So I can say that segment AB, or I can say AB is equal to CD, and I can plug in X plus 2 for AB because that's what it's equal to, and 2X minus 3. And I can solve for X, so I'll add over 3, subtract over X, so X is equal to 5. And then if I want to solve for AB, all I got to do now is just plug in X in for what X was equal to. So we know that AB, let me use a different color that I haven't used yet. So we know that AB is equal to X plus 2. Well, we just solved that X is equal to 5. So AB is equal to 5 plus 2, and AB is equal to 7. All right, so that's using pretty much all the properties to solve some of these problems. Now, there's going to be a problem for you guys to do to hand in, so you will hand this in. All right, remember, we are on section 6.2 now. All right, we're on the second section, 6.2. So in your notes, it'll be listed 6.2.1. And then if you want to type it out, you can type it out. Or if you want to go ahead and take a picture. Now, this one might be hard to type it out because this is going to come up with a system of equations. It tells you to solve using a system of linear equations. All right, so you might need to write this one out, but this is due and part of your notes. All right, and that's it for this video.